Hey Rebels, my name is Matthew Barton. Welcome to the Rebellion Brewing Podcast. Most beer is made with 4 primary ingredients: water, hops, malted barley, and yeast. Malting barley is an essential step in the beer making process. It contributes greatly to the flavor and aroma. Today, I'm sitting down with David Klinger of Prairie Malt, and we're going to talk about all the work his team does to help put beer in your glass. So let's get into it. David, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Matt. It's a pleasure to be on your show, and thank you for your interest in Prairie Malt.
I guess from the very beginning, let's start. Talk to me like I'm 6. Who are you, and what do you do at Prairie Malt?
Yeah, thank you. I'm the commercial manager for Prairie Malt, and I'm a farm boy from Saskatchewan. I used to be a farmer in the 1980s in a town which is Prairie Malt is based in Biggar, but I grew up in a town smaller than Biggar, and I actually sold some barley to Prairie Malt in the 1980s, and 10 years later, by coincidence, I had a job there. So my job is as commercial manager to work with our team and to take care of our customers in Saskatchewan, across Canada, and around the world.
Since the 80s is not an insignificant period of time, that's really awesome to have Saskatchewan businesses or Saskatchewan-based businesses going on for decades. What is the origin story of Prairie Malt?
Yeah, it's kind of an interesting one. I was not there at the very beginning. It was established in 1975, and then we started producing malt in 1977. And it all started when a company out of Europe that was making malting equipment for malt plants realized there was a malt plant in Alberta and a malt plant in Manitoba, but there was no malt plant in Saskatchewan, and Saskatchewan was growing a lot of barley. So they really tried to promote the startup of a malting company, and they eventually got a partner called Henninger. And Henninger at that time was a brewer and a maltster in Germany, but they also had a brewery in Hamilton, Ontario. And so our initial company name was not Prairie Malt, it was Henninger Malting Canada. And so during the 1975 to 77, they started construction, but inflation was a big driver back then in the economy, and the costs of building a malt plant almost ended up being double. So this supplier of malting equipment, Henninger left the project, and this other company went to the provincial government and said, hey, we either need some help from you or other investors, or we're maybe just going to leave that half-built malt plant in Biggar. And so then actually the Saskatchewan government owned it for about 10 years. And then they eventually sold it in the late 80s to a family business malting company out of Wisconsin. It's called Schreier Malting. And Schreier hung on and Schreier owned 51%. And then the Saskatchewan Wheat Pool owned another chunk of it. That's today what we call Viterra primarily. And then us employees, almost all employees owned 7% of the company. So that was really cool. And we owned the company for around 10 years in that entity. And then Schreier sold it to Cargill. Cargill owned it for 20 years. We became very global at that stage. And then Cargill left the malting industry in late 2019 and sold the business worldwide to a company called Boort Malt out of Belgium. So I would say our team is really resilient with going through so many owners, but it's in really good shape now. We're part of an important malting group worldwide.
Does that speak to the volatility of the malting industry, or is it something else that's driving that story?
Yeah, I think it's not a business for everyone, and you kind of have to take a long view. the malting business. It's not something you're going to get really wealthy at. At the same time, I think it's probably driven more by the fact that global brewers are consolidating and getting larger, and therefore malting companies need to be consolidating and getting larger as well to be able to take care of both small and large customers around the world.
Rebellion, happy to say, is a customer of your guys' company. Maybe we should have said that at the very beginning. This is not a paid interview, not a paid advertisement or anything like that. I reached out to you and said, hey, let's talk malting. Who are your other customers?
Yeah, thank you very much. We really appreciate Rebellion's business. We do business with small craft brewers in Saskatchewan, whom we really value and have a deep personal relationship with regional brewers in Saskatchewan. Other brewers across the country and distillers, and also some customers in the food sector. And then really we sell malt all the way from Alaska down to South America. We sell malt and ship it to various parts of Asia and sometimes to Africa. So it's all over the planet.
I know one of the big things that changed for us is we installed a grain silo, and suddenly our brewers weren't having to hump big sacks of grain up the steps into the brew house. They were using the auger from the grain silo, and it required like a vac truck to fill, and it takes time, takes technology and know-how. And my understanding was you guys specifically started adapting some of your equipment to help us fill that grain silo. Could you expand on that a bit?
Yeah, really. We work with third-party truckers, and they have that technology. And I think maybe that's one of the benefits of COVID, is that it allowed us to work on some projects that we were trying to work on before, but we got a little bit more focused and had time to really dig in. And at the same time, some of the craft brewers in Saskatchewan, like you, were getting larger and had the silos. So the timing was really right, and we were able to implement bulk shipments with pneumatic trucks right from our plant in Biggar to various craft brewers in Saskatchewan. So it's going really well from what I understand and the feedback I've heard from your company.
It's really weird that those two things kind of happened in tandem. We got big enough, and then you saw an opportunity, and we were able to kind of localize and shorten our supply chains. Fewer miles from the field to the glass, that's really cool how that kind of confluence came together. And I never could have predicted that 8 years ago. It wasn't on my radar.
Yeah, it's really wonderful that we have this local connection, and it's so convenient to ship malt to you and to other brewers in the province, for sure.
One of the things that was really cool was a few weeks ago I had a farmer come in, and he looks at me and he goes, "Where's your malted barley come from?" I'm like, "Oh, well, the malting facility in Biggar." And he goes, "Oh, I sell to them. So my barley's in this beer." And I'm like, "Very well, I think could be, is." Yeah. He's like, "Man, that makes me so proud." He's like, "I'm so proud that I got to be a part of this." And I'm like, "Man, you're a rebel too."
Yeah, absolutely. And you'll hear me talk often, but farmers are such an important part of the whole equation. I think a lot of people take it for granted that, we'll open a beer and that everything is always consistently great, but there's maybe not everybody thinks about all the things that go into play along the whole supply chain. And even going further back to the barley breeders, I think you've talked to Aaron Beattie at the University of Saskatchewan. The varietal development that they do there is just fantastic. And then through to farmers and grain companies and maltsters and ultimately brewers. Like, there's a lot of stuff goes on to make sure that the malt is delivered on time so you can make great beer and so the consumer can enjoy that. Yeah.
I know it can be pretty quick, like a pivot, where we say we needed barley yesterday, and we can call you guys up and within 24 to 48 hours, boom, trucks are there, supplies are in the tanks, and we're able to give her without too much interruption, which is huge, especially when you don't have the storage space as a small business.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's our honor to work with you on that for sure.
I mean, when I talk to the brewers, they really appreciate that kind of level of service, where they can
Okay.
say, "Oh well, we shook the guy's hand. We talked to him face to face. It wasn't this strange email. It's people in our own backyard."
Thank you. We feel the same way about it. It's great.
I'm sorry, that wasn't really a question, just a comment. But I guess my next question is, I mean, you've been in malt barley for a while. You got to have a couple good stories. What's one story? You're sitting down with your buddies, you crack a beer, and you got to say, you know what? You're never gonna believe this, and you get to crack that beer and tell them about it.
Yeah. Well, there's probably too many stories like that, and I think it's just a general statement that connecting with farmers either at their kitchen table or in their barley field is just a heartwarming tale when you're with a brewer. So I've been in front of farmers at their kitchen table, brought a customer and that customer's brewer's beer along, and the farmer's almost in tears saying, I grow canola, I grow wheat. I've never had a canola end user or canola oil end user or a baker visit me, but here you guys are, brewers, salt of the earth people. You are at my kitchen table. We're going to enjoy a beer together and just talk about the challenges and the fun of our industry, and we're going to go out and look at some fields after that. So I think it's just a wonderful industry. Even when this industry is going through a tough time, it's still a pretty darn good industry to be in.
A bit of a kick in the knackers with that heat wave. Do we anticipate that will affect us for too long? Is it going to be a 1 year, 2 year cycle, or do you think it's going to get a little bit better? Maybe.
Yeah, if I could predict that, I would. I, I would be independently wealthy, but I think right, it was very hot and dry summer. That's the crux of it in 2021. I think most farmers are in most regions of the province are relatively happy with the snow cover they're getting now. It's not the most efficient way to get moisture come springtime when it melts, but I think everybody will be happy to take more snow rather than less because the soil is really depleted of moisture. And then, of course, we need timely rains during the pre-seeding and after seeding and during the growing season in 2022. And then we need the taps to shut off come harvest in around August and September of this year. So let's hope it's just a 1 year thing. Yeah, this is the worst crop that I've ever seen in my 32 years of being in the industry. And it's really rough. So obviously agronomic yield was way down. Therefore, the production of barley is way down. So simple words, supply was down. At the same time, demand was super strong. The export market, China doesn't buy any malt or significant volume of malt, but they buy malting barley. So they bought a massive amount of barley from Canada, as did other export markets. And then the domestic feed market, mainly in Feedlot Alley and Lethbridge, Medicine Hat area, they had a big demand for malting barley. So strong demand, low supply, obviously prices up and quality relatively poor. But you know what? So far, the barley we selected and that we're malting, we expected it to have high beta glucan, so that's a kind of gummy product or cell wall material that brewers don't like. And also we expected it to be relatively thin. Those two things really haven't materialized. The big topic, of course, is that the protein is relatively high, and that is the yin and yang of protein and extract or carbohydrates. So malt extract is lower, the fermentable sugars are lower, but the protein's relatively high. So let's just say we've had a lot of conversations with our customers, and our customers really understand agriculture and barley, and they know how important barley is. And so they have adapted to their specifications to this crop situation because they realize it's what the barley gods gave us. So I'm very happy with our discussions and happy with our customers accepting this year's malt from this year's bad crop. I think one other thing is it's not all doom and gloom. There's, because of the dry conditions, including at harvest, the kernels are relatively bright and healthy, very low mold content. So I think we gotta find every positive we can from this tough crop.
Right, right. To put it into context for people, uh, malting barley, you're trying to thread that needle. You don't want it too wet. You don't want it too moist. You don't want protein too high. You don't want protein too low. The beta glucans, it can't be in such a way that it screws up the entire brew process. And it's really interesting to talk to farmers and hear from their perspective how they thread that needle. And then I feel like we hand it off to, it's a leap of faith. They hand it off to you, your team then malts it and has to handle it in such a way that it meets spec, for us. And I know I was talking to the brewers. I'm like, well, how's it going? How's that new shipment going? And they were really holding their breath. They were like, you know what? We just can't say yet. We're really crossing our fingers. And then they were running the lab tests and making their measurements. And they're saying, you know what? I think we're gonna be okay so far with this one. And we're all kind of whew,
Yeah, yeah. I think the whole industry is doing that. So it's a challenging year, but we'll try to make the best out of a tough one, and also hope for a much better crop in 2022.
How many styles of malt are you guys producing? I know you can get your standard two row, and then there's like chocolate and red, and you can create all these different styles. What's your guys' kind of portfolio?
Yeah, thanks. We're mainly focusing on the two-row base malt, and also can make some. We make some caramel, some Munich, some rye malt, and some wheat malts, white wheat malts primarily. For the other specialty malts, we mainly focus on importing those from our colleagues in Europe or Australia or Argentina. And but as far as those are the core ones that we make in Biggar.
At the end of the day, I think consumers are still learning how important malting is to beer, and I think they're still discovering and delightfully surprised to hear that it's happening right here in Saskatchewan. What do you think is essential for craft beer geeks like me to know about malting for beer?
Yeah, I think repeating a bit what I said earlier is just understanding all the components that go into this, and the complexity of it, and that it relates back to the barley breeders, the farmers, the grain companies, the maltsters, and of course you guys, the brewers. And I think there is indeed a lot more that consumers can learn about the importance of beer. It's the soul of the beer. It gives the beer the color, and very simply put, no barley, no beer. And that's really hit home, I think, this crop year. You're probably, and you know what? I don't know if it's too technical, but I think some consumers generally seem to relate to hops a bit more than to malt. But even when we talk to craft brewers across North America and around the world, a lot of them say that they've really marketed hops a lot right from their beginning, but they believe there's more stories that can be told about the importance of barley and malt to beer, because all of those ingredients are so essential. And I assume that maybe the whole audience isn't fully aware, but there's basically three steps to malting, and the first one is steeping, and then we germinate it, and then we kiln it. It takes about 7 days, the whole process. But steeping is just so critical. It's at the beginning, and it makes, we got to make sure that there's enough water getting into every part of the kernel and in a good consistent way to help transform, or we call it modify that kernel to get fermentable sugar development. And then the second step, germinating, we let it grow around 4 or 5 days, and it's got to be done at the right temperature and the right time regime. It's kind of like cooking in your kitchen. You got to have the right time and temperature. And there can be a big difference between clean, grainy flavors and then a batch that doesn't work out and it's sour and grassy. So we don't want that. And then the third step is kilning. So we put all that natural biochemical process to sleep. And that's where the color is developed and the flavors. And that's where you get this lovely malty, biscuity, caramel, toasty notes. And this can all have a big impact on the type of beer that a brewer wants to make and wants their brand to stand out versus others in the market. So I can tell you, it's really nice to be on the leeward side of a wind from the malt plant, because you get all these nice smells, and it's a lovely business and relatively environmentally sound business to be in.
I wanted to circle back and touch upon something that you mentioned, where it's kind of this unsung story. Brewers focus a lot on hops, and I will scream and shout from the rooftops how amazing Saskatchewan barley is. And I honestly can't wait to come out and meet you guys in person and tour the Biggar facility and just, crack some fresh kernels between my teeth. And just, I want that full meal deal. I want to get all those pictures and tell that story even bigger. And I just, it's exciting to me, because my family, we all used to be farmers. We all came from, my family farmed near Rollo, and then they moved into the city, and we lost a bit of those roots. But now I get to go back and explore that history again, and come back to it. And I want people to be connected to those stories and connected to the folks at every step of the process, especially as relates to Saskatchewan. I'm just so proud of the work we're doing with you guys, and seeing what you're doing I think it's exciting. I'm a beer geek. I'm biased, but
Well, Matt, you are most welcome to meet with us anytime and visit our facility, meet our team, and see how it works. And we're just very honored to be from a small town, Saskatchewan, making malt for 45 years for local brewers and brewers, distillers, and the food industry around the world. It's very exciting.
Well, thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Matt.
Rebels, thanks for listening today. If you have any questions or comments about this episode, be sure to join us on our brand new Facebook group page, The Rebellion Brewing Podcast. I'm going to include links to all things Prairie Malt, so you can find them online and on social media. I'm also proud to let you know that we're members of the Saskatchewan Podcast Network. It's a one-stop shop for tons of locally produced podcasts from across our province. You can find them at saskpodcastnetwork.com. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Untappd so you don't miss out on the latest in Sask craft beer news. Thank you for joining the Rebellion.